You hear us talk about DevOps, and we talk about in these glowing terms about efficiency, and you get this idea of some kind of utopia thing, but it's got problems. You get a bunch of people together to do stuff, there's always going to be problems.
One of the things that's been tough is the lack of a clear understanding of what DevOps means. And I know I did a retrospective for DevOps Days Austin, and one of the constant themes, it seems every year, is we still have a problem with people not quite getting what it is. It's funny because you'd expect that in the early days, and yet it seems to continue.
Some of the biggest challenges facing the DevOps community, I think, is this always evolving what's next component, right? DevOps is still new to a lot of companies, a lot of teams, but there's also a lot of new terminology coming out there, right? We talk about platform engineering a lot. We talk about XOps a lot. What does that really mean? Well, it means that we're taking what we've learned in DevOps, I think, and trying to do something better. And so a lot of times that means it gets a new name, but if you really peek under the covers, a lot of these new terms are really just forms of DevOps. So I think it's a challenge for us to kind of, help understand where we're going, and that it's not really a total, redo of what we've done in DevOps. I think it's just a natural evolution of, hey, we've learned and we're getting better at things as a community.
It is okay for us to change too, and we should. An example of this would be that we see a lot of new DevOps type phrases showing up, things like DevSecOps or GitOps or AIOps or MLOps. And the immediate reaction of some people who have been around for a very long time is hostility when they hear a phrase like that. And I used to be that way too. I used to think that that was annoying and that it was buzzwordy and it was just sort of capitalizing on the popularity of DevOps to sell another product. And in some cases that is still true, certainly, but I also think it's okay to borrow the context of DevOps to make it easier to explain something. At this point, most people involved in technology do know what DevOps is. You can borrow the shared understanding of what DevOps is to shortcut explaining what your thing is. And I think that is useful.
There's been a fracturing of the community with this confusion around what the term means. And there's definitely people who are going to have a lot of infighting about, well, no, it's what I say it means. No, it's what I say it means. And there's just this challenge of trying to keep the idea alive without it getting buried underneath shiny tools and a focus on the easy things versus the hard things that are part of our life.
I think some of the biggest changes recently even is there's a lot more fragmentation now around what is DevOps, is it dead, what's happening with it, specifically around like SREs and platform engineering, kind of seeing what is the divide in that. I mean, to me, like they feel like they're just roles that are implementing DevOps, right?
There's definitely some adversarial marketing going on that is purporting to say that DevOps is dead. I don't necessarily agree. I'm on your side here. I believe that SRE and platform engineering are just implementations of DevOps. That is just the way that our language has evolved from calling people DevOps engineers.
I think that the changing of the buzzwords or the progression of DevOps and then SRE and then platform engineering is not that any one of them were wrong. It's sort of an acknowledgement that every practitioner or every company is at a different stage and they do things a slightly different way. I feel like we need to be comfortable with not being so stubborn on the words that we use and recognizing that we're all of the companies out there, all of the human beings out there, we're at different stages and we do things a little bit differently. And there's not one right answer.
DevOps is basically an umbrella statement of doing things in the opposite way of the horrible, bad, often old ways. If they want DevOps to be dead, to go back to the old, bad, horrible ways of doing things, go for it, please have fun, and we eagerly await your return.
If we look at challenges with DevOps, there is more ability for developers to do a lot of things that operations used to do.
There's a focus that the developers are becoming operations,
Yes.
and there's that obsession with generalists?
I think in practice, unfortunately, a lot of companies at first think, oh, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to have fewer people wear more hats. And so I think that is one problem that DevOps faces, is companies trying to use it as a way to put more work onto fewer people.
And I've heard it all before. They talk like shift left. It's like, oh, we'll just move operations left and have developers do it. And there have been a number of tools and services out there designed to do just that. But we're gonna have the developers do more because now they can do more. They don't have to have that operational expertise. We're farming that operational expertise out to the service provider.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in this ecosystem that, back to the DevOps movement, is they assume, oh, I'm a DevOps engineer or SRE, whatever you want to call it.
Platform engineer.
Platform engineer. Oh, that means you can do everything. Well, no, there's specific skills inside the DevOps ecosystem, but people forget that. Like, as much as easy it is to use Ansible to do automation, you still need to spend some real time learning how to leverage Ansible to do the automation. It's the day 2 operations you got to start worrying about. The day 3 operations. Yeah, who even talks about day 3 now? Nobody, because nobody realizes.
Forgot it.
Yeah, nobody realizes that's a real problem.
Yeah,
right?
with this world of everything's ephemeral and we just knock it down, stand it back up, they forget the long-running processes and issues that show up all the time.
I hear we need databases still. Is that a thing? I don't know.
I don't know anymore, JJ.
The companies that do it well, I think there are a lot of studies out there that show that if you use it as a way to bridge that gap between development and operations and to incorporate new skills that can help make your processes faster, I think there's a lot of research that shows that organizations that do that well do a lot better.
Ops is supporting developers and they're working at this collaboratively. It's back to the empathy, and both sides need to be aware of what they need to do for their job and how they need to work to support one another. Between the two, it's this mutual respect that is key.
One of the biggest things that I hear from end users is that they are so overwhelmed by tool bloat. There's so many options in the DevOps space for tools that they could use.
Problem number 2 I've seen is that they try to glue together all of this kind of land of misfit toys set of technologies to try to get, hey, I'm gonna go use this for this problem and this for this problem, and all of a sudden, what before was kind of a problem with more traditional tooling became a problem where now we have 20 or 30 things that we have to make work together.
All of these tools are trying to obfuscate away complexity by putting something on top of it, right? Without teaching people how to navigate the complexity themselves. We are giving these people a fish and we're not teaching them how to do it. And I think the community wants people to learn how to fish. And the vendors want to give them to them in exchange for money. And there's always going to be this tension between the two. And the community, we feel, should always win.
What's happening out there is they have a lot of choice. And sometimes in the DevOps community, choice is not always good. Choice is good when you're trying to solve a problem and you have just enough choices that you're going from good, better to best, and you can kind of play with those to meet your outcomes. But sometimes I just want that experience to be delivered with an integrated set of tools and outcomes where maybe I'm getting all of the compute and storage and OS and hypervisor and automation from the same kind of experience, from a sales perspective, from a consumption model perspective, from an operating model perspective. So one of the things in the DevOps space, if you can't DIY it, which sometimes is very, very hard, especially if you don't have enough people, then looking at more of this all-in type of an approach that might have less choice but give you a little bit quicker time to market and time to value, that's usually one of the things I'm seeing customers struggle with right now.
I think we're afraid to really pull the curtains back on and look at objectively as how complex we've made everything, right? And when things scale and when they get more complex, we don't ever simplify them. We just abstract the complexity with something else which then becomes more complex.
Right.
Until we abstract it with something else.
And then do it again and again instead of maybe just going, like, being more minimalist and saying, okay, what if we rethought this approach?
We've been around long enough to remember the advent of the cloud, right?
Yeah.
And there was the promise of the cloud that it's going to be super simple. You're just going to come in here, you're going to click on the console, maybe do an API call, you spin up this instant, and you use it for what it's for, and it goes away. Like this, oh great, that sounds so wonderful. Let's do that. That sounds so much more simple than standing up a data center and like running all the cable and do it, because you just do that. And I think in the late aughts and early teens, it probably was that simple.
I think it was. Heroku, I think, is a great example. Heroku really was that simple. And that, I think, is what was magical about it.
Yeah.
And that brought a whole bunch of people into it. And even some early like AWS things were that simple.
Oh, S3 when it came out, it was literally simple.
It literally was that simple. I remember when S3 came out, I was writing very simple like cron jobs like on my WordPress site to like back things up, and it was so dead easy. And I was like, oh, I can just go to this endpoint. It's just a put, and all of a sudden I have a tarball, exactly where I need it, and I can use any number of kind of clients to get access to that data. And that's just a call to grab it, right? It's so simple.
I can reuse these same static assets
over and over again.
How simple is that?
Right. And then as we go on and it becomes more than just smaller people using these things, and industry starts to really adopt it, it's like then we have to complicate it and we have to add these additional layers, and we're recreating in many ways the systems that we were trying to get away from to begin with. Why do we continue to have to make it more and more complicated? And I think I have to think it's probably self-preservation a little bit, because we think if we make it too easy, then other people will kind of come in, and we look at that as a threat rather than an opportunity. What I do might no longer be valuable, so I have to create this more complex ecosystem and whatnot so that I can ensure my role in it.
One of the things that comes up is the idea of technical debt. Technical debt is not something you want, but it tends to be a bit inevitable in many cases.
To a very large extent, Western society is software defined, right? And at every aspect, companies that adopted our technology tend to be the government, the infrastructure providers, like the actual public infrastructure providers, power plants, hospitals and things like that. But what ended up happening, I feel like, is that when they made that adoption at that level, because they are so critical, they had that kind of load-bearing technical debt. That's where they stopped because it worked. And so we still rely on layers of software for our life. Sometimes maybe stuff that was still on COBOL and punch cards in some cases, all the way through some modern WASM thing that operates our banking app. The way we make phone calls on our telephones is software defined. And so when we think about all the ways that software has been developed since the advent of software, right? We look at how critical software is that was developed back then to our daily lives, the things we depend on, versus a lot of times the software that just offers us convenience.
It's interesting to think that a lot of the software, that most of the software in the world existed to run kind of faceless infrastructure and has been there a long time. I think the IRS might still run some of it, but and then all the utilities and all that stuff. You're also hitting on something, especially with infrastructure, that one of my old bosses, he didn't come up with this term. He always liked this idea of pace layering. What it basically means is you separate out this core that changes every 5 to 10 years. And basically you don't touch it because it works, right? And then you keep adding layers, and all of these other layers have, different timelines of changeability, if that's a word, right? And we even have this notion in computers in general of a stack of layers. What you say is sure, you have all this legacy software. So what people have worked on for the past 5 or so years is they have gotten really good at basically using APIs and kind of figuring out, so one of these layers of 10 layers or so, we're gonna go, I'm just making this up, but we're gonna go 7 layers deep. And we're gonna kind of put a little wormhole in here that's an API, and we're gonna write the code that allows you to go talk with the mainframe to transfer money or whatever. But because we have this API here, we can now, like, just like we would do in this room, we can now basically take out the walls and put in whatever new walls you want. And we can do that as much as you want to pay for it, right? Like, as frequently as you want to. And that is like, whenever I think about the kind of how quickly you can deploy your software, kind of like the flexibility and agility of software, that's something like doing it in a containerized way versus a big monolithic way. Like, you're buying yourself that flexibility to change the walls around a lot more.
Technical debt, as I understand it, is organizations being saddled with old, antiquated technology that are holding them back from being all that they can be. You think about organizations using, say, operating systems and application platforms that are no longer supported by the vendor that creates them, going, oh yeah, we're still using Windows Server 2008 and SQL Server 2008 and are mission critical, the applications that are the bread and butter of the organization. The whole organization is running on this application that is running on this super old infrastructure. That's technical debt right there, because they're not able to be agile and flexible. That is not going to translate over to creating software at very high velocity like we want with DevOps. So it takes a long time to do upgrades, to care and feed for these old systems, and all of that time that the operations folks and the software developers as well spending on caring and feeding for these old systems. That's time that they can't be spending innovating and thinking about what's next. And at the end of the day, again, how do we add new features and functionality to our software at a very rapid cadence so that we can help our business win?
Architectures matter. So sometimes we need to go through a little short-term pain of some re-architecture, and that's true in a lot of spaces, to get that long-term gain. If you don't do it, it's just kicking the can down the road.
So another fun topic in the industry is cloud. And I remember when cloud actually came about in the early 2000s, right? This was after the bubble, and all of a sudden these magical clouds appeared out of nowhere. And we had jokes about fog computing back in the day. There was a whole bunch of jokes we used to have back then. But cloud finally became obviously a huge industry, but besides an industry, it facilitated an operating model.
The cloud and DevOps have grown up together. So DevOps has helped to enable the cloud has helped to enable DevOps. So as they've grown symbiotically. What you've seen though, however, as we get more current, more recent, there is a bit of a divergence in that DevOps is being applied to on-prem as well. And this is a result of say, repatriation, or those people who realize that, yeah, public cloud is great for this, but there really are situations we've been using it for that make more sense to be using it on-prem in our own data centers. And the same has been true over time, in that there's always been things, because of security reasons, because of sensitive data, that you've done on-prem, and DevOps has had to work with that as well. And so you get that way a multi-cloud solution. So while it's public cloud and DevOps have grown up together, helping each other grow, and there's also been on-prem that's been alongside it. More recently, you've seen the on-prem side grow as people have realized that there's certain workloads that they took to the cloud that really make more sense financially and because of agility to have in their own data centers.
Cloud and on-prem are both mainstays at most companies, right? Whether you're a large company or a small company. I mean, small companies tend to go cloud, but the reality is on-prem hardware and software are still major components to a lot of applications. And for many applications, there is no other choice. The application of certain use cases dictates sort of that it can't go on the cloud for certain reasons. And there are a lot of benefits to using both cloud and on-prem. So having that multi-cloud strategy, I think, is probably going to be a common practice for many organizations. And they're used for different reasons, right? You may have a company use cloud for a lot of the developer enablement, meaning, we can unblock them fast so they can use development environments. But at the end of the day, they're probably deploying to something on-prem that's, mission critical. We see ebbs and flows in the market too with, how much a company invests in cloud versus comes back on-prem. And I think that'll kind of continuously happen as we go forward. And on-prem will always have a place, even though cloud is definitely something that's taken off and really expanded over the years.
It led into a lot of the OpEx versus CapEx conversations. It led into a world where end users started to learn about what it's like if they didn't have to manage all the nerd knobs under the covers of the infrastructure. How could they just spin up an application or a service or a virtual machine or just magically get storage by swiping a credit card, and they didn't need to spend days or weeks standing up hardware? So when you look at cloud versus on-prem, cloud led the way from an experiential perspective for many years. On-prem, on the other hand, has always kind of been that, we're gonna deliver the performance as you need it, with the features as you need it, with all the nerd knobs when you want them. But at the end of the day, the experience was kind of lacking for many years. That's transitioning now. I think that's getting fixed now and going into the future, where you're seeing that cloud experience bleed into on-prem. And that's really where the multi-cloud conversations come in. That's where Kubernetes is starting to help in that space, and a lot of these kind of platform engineering, DevOps engineering conversations.
With all the advantages of going to public cloud, now people have realized, so now I need to maintain multiple clouds for whatever reasons, maybe for resiliency or for security concerns or availability and so on. So now even the cloud landscape looks to be complicated. So that's an area where I think if done right, if the experience of managing infrastructure and applications can cut across the environments and give a better experience for organizations, that would be huge.
If you look at where Dell and other kind of more legacy providers have come since 2020 in adopting cloud native technologies, open source technologies, trying to get out into the communities, they're now seeing that, and as customers are now seeing like what our kind of perilous macroeconomic conditions are at the moment, that now we want to really start looking at not repatriating to the data center, but like immigrating maybe, or just buying a vacation home there, and going back and forth and being really, really hybrid cloud, but not hybrid cloud between hyperscalers, but between also data centers as well.
Well, when I think about like Dell, we've been a traditional infrastructure provider for many, many years. So there's some awesome stuff about public cloud. If you want to spin something up fast, if you've got something that's incredibly spiky, if you want you've got 4 people on a dev team you just need to build, it is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
But much like when you build your first prototype, that's not necessarily your final production product. Likewise, you need a lot of other considerations come into it. The way I kind of frame it up and talk to people is you optimize for what environment you're operating in.
Right.
Your optimization for today, when the world changes, becomes your technical debt.
Yeah.
And so what can you do to operate in a world where you give yourself maximum flexibility to be able to move around? So what are you optimizing for? One of the changes that we've been making over the past couple of years is shifting towards a pay for what you use, pay as you go kind of model, to get away from, hey, I need this large capital upfront. Hey, pay for what you use. That's a model that works. And there's a lot of customers that are interested in that.
We're seeing now where these smaller companies who were born in the cloud or who have always been practitioners of DevOps with a lot of automation and observability and things like that are now becoming the enterprise. And now they're looking to expand into the data center versus repatriating to one.
So there's, for a long time, was this view that the data center and cloud were diametrically opposed, and it was one over the other, and no matter which side you were on, you saw the other as competition.
Star Trek, Star Wars.
Over the last few years, you see organizations have started to acknowledge that, for example, cloud had looked at hybrid as, it's a stepping stone to cloud. This is our our way of getting them into the cloud, because we're going to take over the world and absorb everything, right? But they've realized that for most organizations, hybrid isn't a stepping stone, it's the end result, it's the goal, right? So for those organizations that were born in the cloud and are looking to expand to on-prem, they want to do this, but they want to do it consistently with the way that they manage their cloud resources. And so how can you help me do what I do up here, but do it down here without making me learn a new set of technologies, adopt a new set of procedures, write things differently? I want that consistency. I want consistency of development, consistency of management, and that's been the key.
Something that I'd like to see change more quickly is moving from talking about problems to solutions about problems. And it's great to bring light to issues, but I think we always get stuck at that first stage where we're like outraged and we're talking about things, and I don't often see what happens as a result of that. So we get outraged together in person, and then we go back to our business day to day, and then we meet again and we do the same thing in an open space. And I haven't seen it shift to like the actionable phase.
People do tend to just like talk a lot about what needs to change or how things might change, but affecting change is very slow.
DevOps, as is true for any methodology or technology that you adopt, is going to have its obstacles. It's going to have its places where you get bogged down. And that's actually part of the process, is this idea of continuous learning. So you get stuck in something, and you learn, you have these loops, you move on agilely, and it works. One of the biggest things that helps DevOps to get over these hurdles, these friction points or these obstacles, is the community.
I think the thing that DevOps does promote more than any other kind of technical movement beforehand is that community. Like, that is how that culture spreads. You can't just implement DevOps in a vacuum because you're going to get it wrong.